What's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Back today with another client interview for you guys. Really excited about this one today. We have Kourosh on with us, and he is a senior who just finished going through his full-time recruiting process. Oh, sorry, no, I take that back. You're a junior that just
Yeah.
going through your summer internship recruiting process. I
Mm.
don't know why I always think you're a senior. I think it's because you look really mature, but um, but anyway, he just finished going through his summer internship recruiting process. And I think he has a pretty interesting background and in terms of like kind of where he started and kind of how he ultimately pivoted into banking. And so why don't I just get him to come on here today and kind of talk to you guys about how he was able to make that transition. And I know every now and then we come across other students who are also trying to make a similar type of transition. And so hopefully for those of you out there who are trying to do the same thing, this will be really beneficial for you. So anyway, with that said, Kourosh, I want to thank you for taking time. If you don't mind, maybe you can start off by just kind of introducing yourself a little bit, give our kind of audience a little bit more about just kind of who you are, what your background is, how you got to where you are today. And then I have some follow-up questions for you as well.
Yeah, 100%. So my name is Kourosh, like you said, third year at the University of Chicago. I'm also on the varsity football team. And kind of like my story was I kind of came into college like not knowing necessarily what I wanted to do. You have a lot of kids that come in freshman year that know they want to do banking, but like I was kind of like playing around with going pre-med. And then kind of some point in my freshman year, I took like an econ class because like you got to take an econ class at U Chicago. And at that point, like I was like, this is more fun than my pre-med classes. So yeah, I ended up taking some other courses that summer at like London School of Economics. Met some people, and kind of early on, I was kind of more so looking into like going into trading, like prop trading firms and things like that. So my sophomore year, I was kind of recruiting from a lot of like capital markets and sales and trading roles. And I landed a role at an investment bank for my sophomore summer. And then kind of like around like the heat of recruiting for juniors is kind of like winter, spring of your sophomore year. And at that point, I was like, I wasn't fully committed to investment banking. I didn't know if that was like the right path for me at all. So I kind of had like one foot in the door, one out. And I was just kind of, throwing my resume around, kind of had this like fear of failure almost, because I was like, like I don't necessarily know if I want to do banking at that point. And, it's super overwhelming. Like even thinking about the recruiting process, there's so many different aspects, like building your network, behaviorals, like making sure your resume is good. Obviously, at the time, thinking I had to memorize like 400 technical questions. So, at the time I was like, okay, like, I'll apply, and if I hear back, I'll start prepping. But, I'm more so geared towards like trading roles that usually will open up in my junior fall. But kind of towards like May, June, that's where I realized like investment banking is a better fit for me in terms of like my career prospects, obviously exit opportunities, and like my personal skill set. But unfortunately, like summertime, that's kind of where most like at least elite boutiques are done. Bulge brackets, like we talked about, are like in their ninth inning. So at that point, it's definitely a challenge trying to network, obviously, and get interviews. I kind of tried to do that by myself, and it wasn't working. So obviously, saw your ads on LinkedIn and Instagram, and got in contact with actually Christian, who's also at Citi. Talked with him, and then we had our meeting. And after that, I was kind of sold that, if I want to take this next step, and if breaking into investment banking is like my number one priority, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to do whatever it takes to be like the best candidate I can. And I'm very fortunate and also very grateful to have joined Wall Street Mastermind. But that's kind of like my story.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think to kind of summarize for people, it sounds like you came into college pre-med, didn't really know what you want to do. Then, like through the exposure of some classes, both at Chicago and at LLC, you realize like actually you want to go more like the econ/business route. And then initially you're actually more set on sales and trading and not fully into investment banking. And so you actually, I mean, when you came to us, I think it was like late, it was like mid-July.
Yeah.
of the summer after your sophomore year, right?
Mhm.
And at that time, I think you had you were doing your sophomore summer internship at the
Yeah.
time, but it was in like sales and trading,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Okay. Um, but then like by the time you came to us, you had realized you want to do banking, but the problem was it sounds to me like the problem was just by the time you realized most of the top banks had already finished recruiting. So it was
Yeah.
kind of what do you do from there? Um, and as you came in what mid-July, and then I guess ultimately, if we fast forward to the end, you got your offer in what is it, September or October?
I think it was like the last week or the last week of September. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so last week of September, so a little over 2 months, basically.
Mhm.
And just so people know, like, where'd you get your offer from?
Oh, I got my offer from the city. I'll be at their financial institutions group in
Okay,
New. Yeah.
awesome. That's in New York, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I would say, I don't know about you, but even for us, I think that exceeded our expectations for you. Just not
Nice.
because we didn't think you were capable or whatever, but just because of how late it was in the process already. Like you said, by the time you came to us, it was like halfway through sophomore summer, all the elite boutiques were done, and like the vast majority of the bulge bracket banks were done too. And
Mhm.
so was that kind of way? I'm pretty sure because I remember I was the one that talked to you first, or not like
Yeah.
after Christian at least, like, but I was the one that talked to you before you joined the program. I probably told you like, hey, like you could probably like try to get into middle market bank for your junior summer, and then if you want to move up to a bulge bracket early boutique, we might have to recruit again for full time or something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That was like kind of what I told you. I'm pretty sure. So, um, so like, did this like exceed your expectations then? Like, were you expecting to get an offer from a bulge bracket bank or?
Yeah, definitely. After our conversation and just looking at it like realistically, like my focus was definitely middle market banks. But I also realized like, starting off so late, I didn't have like a network yet. And I was kind of thinking like in the future, like I'd obviously want a lateral to like a bulge bracket or elite boutique. So I was on the phone with a lot of like bankers at these bulge brackets and elite boutiques. And actually through building my network, I was able to get a referral for City. So I'm very fortunate about that. But yeah, like my focus was just mostly middle markets. Um, and I guess through building my network, I was able to get
Yeah.
this position. Yeah.
And like, what was the situation there? Like, was it they had already filled the rest of their class and then they just had like one spot left, or were they just recruiting later than most of the other groups at City, or how did you kind of like fall into that, I guess?
Yeah, so essentially, I was actually recruiting really heavily with the City Tech group. So I was on like I had probably about a dozen phone calls with City Tech, and they knew I was kind of interested in fintech as well, and their fintech group is kind of within their Fig group. So through that, I was able to get on the phone with some bankers who are in the Fig vertical, and then ultimately they reached out to me and said like they have like a couple of super days in October. So that's kind of how it worked out. But I think they only had like a few other spots to fill. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. So it sounds like basically through your networking, you got connected with the Fit group, and then the guys in the Fit group really liked you, and then so invited you to the Super Day, which is awesome, by the way. So, I guess if we kind of go back then, because like something else that you said was prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind, obviously you had already realized that actually maybe banking is just a better career path for you in terms of uh I think you said in terms of like exit opportunities, in terms of um your career prospects, like what makes you say that, I guess? Because I think like a lot of people out there who maybe are just starting out and exploring finance as an industry or potentially working on Wall Street, I think like the number one question always comes down to like, oh, should I do investment banking or should I do sales and trading? Right.
Yeah.
And so obviously you've done both because you did sales and trading your sophomore summer and now you're about to go into investment banking. Like, what was the decision making process there? And like, what went into like what was your thought process or what made you say like actually I think banking has better career prospects and better exit opportunities? Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. 100%. So I guess some background, like the desk I was working at this past summer was like a securitized products desk. So it is a little bit niche. And like for me, one of the biggest reasons for me for wanting to break into banking was just like the unparalleled learning experience you have. Obviously working on all different sorts of transactions, obviously M&A deals. And I think ultimately, like as an investment banker, you build like a very unique skill set that applies to like a lot of different other jobs in finance.
Yeah.
And just I think coming out of college, if you're interested in finance, really ambitious, like there's no better like position to start in. And that was after talking with a lot of guys who were in my shoes that also were like in sales and trading and then pivoted to investment banking, and just talking with guys like that kind of also convinced me about that. But yeah, ultimately I wanted like more of a broader exposure, and obviously like the client facing aspect of investment banking was something that drew me towards it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were kind of my reasons.
Okay, gotcha. And so like the other thing that you mentioned too was that I guess for those few months when you decided after you realized, hey, I want to do banking, and then like prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind, um, like towards like starting like May, June, because you realized May, June, and you didn't join us until like mid-July, right? So like for those 1 or 2 months, like you tried networking on your by yourself, didn't really work.
Mhm.
Kind of like take us through that period of time when you were trying to figure things out on your own. Like, what were some of the things you were doing, and like, why do you say like it didn't work? Like, what was not working for you? I guess.
Yeah, 100%. So I think obviously one of the biggest reasons was like how late I did start. So the networking I did do was kind of just with people kind of who are either in my fraternity who graduated or also on the football team. Speaking to them was definitely beneficial, but I wasn't like mass like emailing a bunch of people. And as far as like interview prep, I was really just like working on like basic behaviorals and like studying 400 IB questions, and then now having gone through the process, like now I know those are not the questions they're asking me uh, at all. So yeah, that was kind of like the extent to what I was doing, but I kind of realized that I really needed to kick it up a notch if I wanted to secure like a great offer, especially at that point. So kind of when I really started getting serious about it was when I got in contact with you. But like before then, like just like basic prep, I'd say, and definitely not networking nearly enough. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, it's funny because I think like the way you were going about it or what you just described is kind of how most people go about it.
Mm,
Like I think it's a very similar experience that we see time and time again, where students that come to Wall Street Mastermind and realize in hindsight they were networking, but they weren't networking nearly enough, or like they network because everybody knows you're supposed to network, but like nobody really knows like just what that really means or what
yeah.
that really entails, right? And it's just so critical when it comes to like being able to get interviews. Like if it wasn't for your networking, like you said, like you would not have heard about this
Yeah.
look back at opportunity at City this late in the process, right?
Mm,
It wasn't like you just like found this job posting online or something, or like
yeah.
shake, right? Which is like what a lot of people are relying on. And then also the other thing is like 400 questions guy, like to be honest, that's what everyone's using.
Yeah.
So it's
Literally.
like it's not even your fault for like using it. It's just like probably everyone you talk to is like, oh yeah, just like read this guide or whatever. And I always try to tell people, and people don't believe me, but I always try to tell people exactly what you just said, which is like when you actually go through the interview process, you realize that they're not asking you the exact questions from the 400 questions guide.
Yeah. Literally.
But there's a reason why they're not, right? Like I think what people don't realize is the 400 questions guide was written, I don't know how many years ago at this point. At least 5, but probably closer to like 10 years ago, if I had to guess. But like someone can check on that and confirm it. And like back when it was first written, I think those questions were actually pretty good because it
Mm,
wasn't this like guide that every single person read. The thing is like interviewers adapt, right? Like if you go through 10 years of this and every single year, like it becomes this like ubiquitous thing that everybody's using, and the bankers know that every student just memorizing the answers to these 400 questions. Like, do you think they're going to ask you the exact same question from the exact same list? Because like that doesn't do anything for them, right? They're trying to figure out like who actually knows this stuff and who doesn't. And so like I think that's the issue is that like if all you're doing is memorizing the exact questions from those guides, you're gonna go into these interviews and you're gonna get asked a bunch of questions that you didn't memorize because
Mhm.
all you did was memorize it. Like you're not gonna be able to answer the questions that you actually get asked,
Yeah,
right?
100%. And like also like I have friends that have gone through the process and they'll stay up all night like cramming, like memorizing those questions. And before I joined this program, that was the thing I was worried about was technicals. I think and like the first time we met, like you like how do you think your technicals are? Like how would you rate it? And I was like, oh, I think like a 5. And then you asked me some technical and I completely bombed it. And I was just using like my knowledge of just like the 400 IB. But yeah, like now going through the process, like using the modules and like the way it's structured, like the technical concepts, once you understand them, you understand them. It's obviously you have to always like keep working at it to brush up and stuff, but like the bulk of my interview prep was with my behaviorals, like making sure my story was strong and obviously working with the coaches as well. But it's kind of crazy because before then I was just like, oh, like I just have to memorize these 400 technicals and speak on my resume and stuff. But like it's so much more than that.
So let's like dive into that a little bit more, right? Because I think now like people are hearing this and they're like wondering like, well, what the heck is so different, right? Like, so you talked about like learning into the technical modules. Can you describe like for you, what was the biggest difference between learning it that way versus like say memorizing answers from the guides? Like, because it sounds like you didn't really have to memorize answers to specific questions, right? So how did you actually go about learning this stuff and like how long did it take you to learn everything you needed to learn? Like, was it a lot faster or a lot slower, a lot easier, a lot harder? Like, can you just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think when we first start the technical workshop, there's like a 2 hour like just overview high level of everything. And I think that helped me a lot, like first getting the basis of kind of like all the different concepts you need to know. But then at that point, it's just like working through like all the different modules. I think I went through the technical modules in like about a week, like during my summer. And just taking notes on that, looking over that a lot. And just once you kind of absorb those concepts, like you just feel comfortable with whatever they ask you. Because most of the time, they kind of ask you like more so basic questions and try to see if you really understand things. And there were some questions like with my city interview, I think I had like 2 30-minute technical interviews and I like answered every question right. But there were some questions where I had to like think about it and answer it. And they appreciate that a lot because it's not like, oh, like I just memorized something.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I think the difference is, oh, sorry.
No, go
But
ahead. What were you gonna say?
yeah, I think the difference is just like you don't have to like cram your brain with all these different like answers and stuff. It's more so just understanding it, being relaxed about that, and more so focusing on your story and behaviorals. At
Yeah.
least experience.
Yeah. So I think like if I were to kind of paraphrase what you just said, the biggest difference is you're no longer trying to memorize answers to specific questions and then hoping that your interviewer is going to ask you those exact same questions.
Yeah,
Rather, you were able to learn the actual concepts. And by the way, it only took you about a week to learn all the concepts, which is like very, very quick, right?
mm,
Because most people, like if you say, "Oh, I'm going to memorize answers to 400 questions," it probably take you longer than a week, and
yeah,
also it's not as effective, right? So you only spend about a week, which is actually like pretty common and pretty normal for our students that we see. Like we have some students that come in and they do in like 3 or 4 days, but like it just depends on like what else you have going on and what's on your plate, right? But like you learn everything in about a week, and then like what you're describing in terms of the types of questions you have to answer is like a lot of these questions you got them right, but you have to kind of actually think about it on the spot because they're not just asking you like definitional questions like
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
what's the formula for a DCF? Like anybody can regurgitate a formula, but like they're asking you what I call like application questions, which is like you have to take the knowledge you already have and actually apply it to
yeah,
like a scenario. And you have to be able to think on your feet, but like you can't do that if all you did was memorize the answers to a question word for word, because you're not actually like you don't actually know how to think about it. You're just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to say.
100%, exactly.
But
Yeah,
if you actually get to the level where you have application knowledge, then you're no longer worried about like, oh, what questions are going to ask me and like trying to figure out and guess and predict the exact question. You'll never be able to predict the exact questions that they're going to ask you,
mm,
right?
yeah,
So the only way to really truly prepare, that's foolproof, is if you just know the underlying concept so well that it doesn't matter what questions they ask you, right?
Yeah.
And it's also a lot faster, by the way, when you do it that way.
100%. And like I'm a very visual learner, so like having like videos and you drawing things out, like really it stuck with me a lot better. Obviously than reading the 400 questions, but yeah, I found the technical modules like technicals was something I was very worried about when I first started the process, and it was quickly something that I felt very comfortable with early on. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's my biggest take. Yeah.
that's awesome. So technicals went from being one of your biggest worries to something that you kind of just like stopped worrying about very quickly. And then to your point, you kind of sound like spent a lot more of your effort and energy on like working on your behaviorals and on your story and polishing that up. And so like talk to us about that, because obviously here in Wall Street Mastermind, we know that that's actually the right way to do it. Like the behavioral interview is a lot more important, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like most people, when they're like first getting into investment banking recruiting, most people don't realize that, or just like how you were coming in, like you probably thought like the technicals were a lot more important, and there's just so much more emphasis placed
Yeah.
on getting the technicals correct, right?
Mhm.
Or somehow, for some reason, a lot of the guides, financial mind courses out there, they're all focused on the technicals. But like, how did you go through prepping for the behaviorals, and also like, what made you realize that that was actually where you should be spending more of your time?
Yeah, 100%. So, like the way the modules are set up, they're like in a very structured way. So, first you start off with like why you want to break into this, and you go through like some motivational videos. It goes networking, behaviorals, and then technicals. So, kind of when I was going through more so my networking behaviorals, I think I had about like 70, 80 phone calls from like when I join the program to when I got my offer. And just speaking with like all different sorts of bankers, and just having my behaviorals down, at least having like at least some experience working with them, I was able to talk like intelligently about a lot of things. And through my conversations, like I realized bankers care a lot more about like why you want to join this group, like how your story kind of fits in, and like can you speak intelligently on deals and stuff like that. So that was kind of like the main focus of mine, and especially when I started networking, knowing how to ask the right type of questions and get information that you can bring up in your interviews and super days that can be like impressive, because everyone can kind of like memorize those technical questions and go from interview to interview, but the candidates that stand out are the ones that have a great story for why they want to join this group or this bank, and kind of fit that in. It shows like they're more dedicated to this interview and this group and landing this offer. So that's something I quickly realized early on. But yeah, that's kind of how I went about it.
So you're actually saying you realize it because you were networking with a bunch of bankers, I mean, 70, 80 bankers, 70, 80 phone calls. It was probably reach out to a lot more than that, but
Yeah.
like 70, 80 phone calls in about 2 short months, right? Because you got your offer like late September. So that was only about a 2 month process from the time you joined till you got the offer. But like that means like let's say you're doing 35 to 40 phone calls a month. That's like over one networking call a day on
Yeah.
average, basically,
Yeah.
right? Including weekends. And through that process, you actually realize that the better your behavioral answers are, the more likely it is that you're going to do well in those networking conversations, the more likely it is that you actually get the opportunity to interview in the first place,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because I always tell people this is like your behavioral interviewing skills is actually a lot more important
Mhm.
in determining whether you get the interview or not. Because like very rare, I mean, out of 70 or 80 conversations, like how many of those conversations did people actually like test you on your technicals? My guess is like very few.
Literally zero. I never got asked a technical in any networking call.
Yeah, zero. Right. And like, so I don't know, tell people like it's usually like sub 5%, sometimes like 0 to 5%.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that just goes to show you like you don't really need to know your technicals except for like maybe the 2 technical interviews that you have. And obviously for those interviews, you still need to know your technicals, but like
Yeah. Yeah.
before you can even get there, if your behavior answers suck, these people aren't even going to give you the interview. Like the City Fig interview, City Fig people aren't even going to like invite you to their super day if you didn't stand out during your networking conversations with them.
100%. Like the technicals are, I think you mentioned too, they just check boxes, like it's not like a make or break necessarily, but you do have to get like at least most of your technicals right. I think you definitely stand out if you get like all of them right or you answer them very well. But Like the bulk of like your profile as a candidate is definitely with behaviorals, and through my networking, I learned that a lot, and just getting feedback from bankers after interviews as well.
Yeah.
Something I quickly realized. Yeah.
I think the other reason too, though, why people focus so much more on technicals and not behavioral, again, it's not people's fault. But one, I think like this industry as a whole, and when I say this industry, I'm talking about like the industry that Wall Street Mastermind is in, like this investment banking, recruiting, prep industry. I'll lump in like Wall Street Oasis, Breaking into Wall Street, Wall Street Prep, like all these companies. They all place such a great emphasis on technical training, right?
Yeah.
And there's very little to no emphasis on behavioral training.
Mhm.
And I think the reason is it's easier to sell technical training
Yeah.
because I can create a technical interview guide or I can create a financial modeling course one time and it's one size fits all. There's a right answer and a wrong answer. And it doesn't matter who I sell this to, like it can work, right?
Mm.
But for the behavioral interviews, it's like every single person is going to have a different answer.
Yeah.
And these companies can't really realistically help you that much on the behaviorals unless they're actually like working with you one-on-one, which they don't want to do. And so like they just place all their emphasis on technicals, and then like all the students are in a way kind of like being misled a little bit in terms of like, oh well, like all the materials out there are like focused on studying technicals, so like this is what I need to do. And also like technicals are naturally more intimidating, like you said, because like if you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer and then you feel dumb, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like behavioral answers, everybody thinks like, oh well, like I can talk about myself, like that's not that hard, like I can do that even if like I don't prep for it, I know how to talk about myself. But
Yeah.
that's like so backwards because it's actually like so much more important. Yes, anyone can talk about themselves, but
Yeah.
not anyone can talk about themselves in a way that makes them stand out. Right.
100%. And I think that's why like this program is like just unparalleled, because like you have people like on your team that have broke into banking, broke into buy side, like helped out with recruiting, know like what it takes. And like you have people that have worked with clients with all different types of stories, and they know how to work with these people in order to like get them across the finish line, you know? Like talking with like one of my friends who got like an internship at like Goldman or something, like asking him for advice, like he only knows his story and how it helped him, but like that's not as obviously valuable as talking with like many people that have worked with many clients, kind of know how to get, like I said, get you across that finish line. And yeah, like the coaches, like I think like their main priority is obviously helping with your story and your behaviorals. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point there, which is like most of the time, like, and by the way, I'm not saying that, you shouldn't go and ask people in your network for advice or upperclassmen or friends that you have that have already gotten in. Like, yeah, ask as many people for advice as you can, obviously. But like most of the time, when you ask someone for advice, especially on something as subjective as your behavioral interviews,
Mm.
whatever advice they give you is typically just going to be based on their own personal experience. Like, oh, this is what I said for my answer. Oh, this is what worked for me. And unfortunately, like a story that worked for them may or may not work for you because like you played football and maybe they didn't, or like you were in your fraternity and you had a leadership position, but maybe they weren't. I'm saying like every single person has a different background, different story, and it's not a one size fits all thing.
Yeah.
And so the sample size of like knowledge or experience that they're drawing on is based on like one person's experience, it might not be that helpful, right? But to your point, if the people that are helping you have actually helped hundreds of students, like to date, as of the time of this interview, like we've worked with, I think just around 700 students plus or minus.
Mm.
That's a much bigger sample size. We've
Yeah.
seen like every single one of these students. We've seen exactly how they're answering these questions. We've also seen like who ended up getting offered from where, so we know like the result of those answers, and then we can like take all the best answers of the most successful students and then do some pattern recognition around like, hey, what do all these people's answers have in common? And then like that's a much more scientific way of going about it. Is like success leaves clues. It's like, hey, all the best answers typically have this common element. Well, now we know like we probably want to have this common element in whatever answer you come up with, right? It doesn't mean that your example is going to be exactly the same or your story is going to be exactly the same, but we do know that bankers like hearing about this, right? And so
100.
that's where like most people when they like prep for behaviorals, I feel it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, like tell me about yourself, right? Okay, let me like think about my answer. I'm gonna like even maybe write it out. It's like, okay, now I'm gonna
Yeah.
practice and rehearse this answer a few times. And it's like, okay, I'm good to go. But
Mm.
like that's like not scientific at all. You don't know if like what you put in your answer is actually what the bankers are looking for. And then more importantly, you also don't know if your answers are actually better than your competition's answers.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think like one thing that you said that kind of like made me think was like one of the reasons I was kind of discouraged and I wasn't as committed kind of in the spring, like the heat of like recruiting, at least for like my class was, I'm hearing about a lot of people recruiting and they've had like multiple internships, either private equity or investment banking. And my professional experience was literally just my upcoming sophomore internship in trading. At that point, I was like, oh, like I don't think I'm a good enough candidate. I'm worried, I could put in all this work and not even reap any benefits. But then after meeting you, and obviously you seeing my profile, you're like, oh, like there's a lot of things we can work with here. And that's something I didn't know at first. And obviously trusting you because you've worked with so many different clients and got them the offer. I knew that like this was like the hub of like everything I needed to get the job. And if I just committed to it and put in the work, I can make myself the best candidate I could be. So I definitely got the confidence from this program for sure.
I'm like makes me really happy to hear that. Because I think that so many times people get discouraged because they think they're not good enough, right? And also like I'm gonna be completely honest, uh some of the places out there like Wall Street Oasis and whatever, like if you go on those boards, which most people do if they're interested in finance jobs, um sometimes those places can be kind of toxic. It's like people make you think like if you're not XYZ, then like you have no shot, or you can forget about it. Oh, you don't go to like an Ivy League school and you don't have 4.0 GPA, then like you can forget about it, right? Like, and so it's just like I don't know. To me, it's kind of negative, but like also a lot of people that are saying these things, you don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Two, a lot of times I don't even think they're being malicious, but I think that when they say things like that, it's actually just like their worldview because it's their version of the truth. They don't personally know anyone who didn't go to an Ivy League school and got into banking, or they don't personally know anyone who didn't do like 2 or 3 investment banking internships already and got into banking. And then
Yeah.
so they're telling you this is how the world works, right?
Yeah.
In reality, like for us, like when I look at Wall Street Mastermind, having worked with almost 700 students, when I look at like our students that have succeeded, like 55% of them don't go to target schools, you know,
Mm.
over 40% of them have a GPA less than a 3.7,
Mm.
right? And I can go on and on. Like there are people that are international students, there are people that came with no relevant finance experience, there are people that whatever, you name it, right? Like all the limiting beliefs that a lot of people sometimes have of like, I can't do this because of fill in the
Yeah.
blank. We have a different worldview on those things because we've seen people with those exact same traits and qualities get into banking. So then, like, when we sit here and tell you on these calls, like, no, actually, like, we're very confident that someone like you can get into banking. That's not just based on like, we're not just like cheerleaders, like rah, rah, whatever. It's like, no, like, we've actually seen this happen. And so, like, believe it or not, we think you can absolutely do it. And like, dude, like, I know you weren't like feeling good about maybe where you were at or whatever. But to us, we were like, dude, I probably told you this, was like, we've had so many students in the program that are like way less qualified than you that like got into banking. So it's like, I actually feel pretty good about you. Right? It's like, um,
Appreciate that.
but like, honestly, that's like sometimes you need someone who's actually seen enough and is
Mm.
experienced, not just based on their own personal experience, but like based on a sample size of hundreds of students. And you need someone like that who's willing to like give it to you and keep it 100% real. And look, sometimes we do talk. I'm gonna be real. Sometimes we do talk to students. And I'm like, oh, sorry, I don't think we can help you.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. There are still people like that out there, right? We can't help everybody, but I'm just like, sometimes if you don't think you can do something, you may be right, but you also may be wrong, and you just want to make sure that you get like an expert opinion from someone before you really kind of like shut down
Yeah.
possibilities, right?
100%. And like a lot of the things like you mentioned, like going to a target school, having like higher than 3.7 GPA, all these experiences, those are not things you can like change overnight at all. And I think for a lot of people, like myself included, like it was kind of holding me back a little bit because I had not like imposter syndrome, but I had like obviously the doubt. But at the end of the day, like you can't let that like stop you from chasing your dreams. And I think I did have a pretty good profile, and I'm very grateful and fortunate for the job I got. But a lot of that was just me, grinding and working hard and understanding that like I can achieve those goals if I just put in the work. And this program like gave me the confidence to do that. So yeah,
Yeah.
beyond just like preparing me, it did more than that as far as like a mindset thing.
I think like, obviously you play football, and so like you of all people understand this, but it's like if you want to like be really good at something, like to play college football, like you have to be pretty good at football, right?
Mhm.
Like not everyone can play college football. It's like to be really good at your sport, or to be like really good at your job, to be like at the pinnacle of a certain profession, which I would consider like investment banking is kind of like, you can say that's the pinnacle of like the finance profession, right? And so like to get to that level, like yes, no matter what, you're gonna need hard work, and you need good work ethic, and you need
Mhm.
like resilience, you need to be able to grind. Um, but at the same time, also like you need good coaching, you need like mentorship, you need like someone to be there and like tell you what to work on and how to work on it. And not only that, like how to do it in a way that's gonna like get you the most results. Right. Like for you to win a football game on Saturday or Sunday, or I guess college football Saturday, it's like for you to win
Yeah,
a football game on Saturday, it's like obviously the players are the ones that have to go out onto the field and like and play the game and win. But like, the coaches play a part in who's like game planning and doing the drills with you and making sure you're prepared, watching film and whatever. And like ultimately, I think like both the athlete and the coach has a part to play in it. And ultimately, the athlete still shoulders like more of the responsibility when it comes to winning, but like
yeah,
it takes both, right? That's why it's like when people scoff at like, oh, having a coach help you with your career, or having a coach like help you, get into some of the most exclusive or difficult jobs to get. It's like it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like it's
yeah.
really not that different, right? You're like competing, you're trying to compete with some of the smartest students across the country at the
Mm.
highest levels. Like this is basically the big leagues,
Yeah,
right?
100%. Yeah, I kind of like say like Wall Street Mastermind is kind of like your private trainer or like private coach almost that you're working with. Like that's the way I would think about it for sure. And I think the analogy to football is like perfect because like you said, like at the end of the day, like I'm bearing like the consequence or more so the weight because like I'm fighting for this offer. But obviously, like I have my coaches to obviously help me get through that and improve as like a candidate, obviously. So um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. So that's man, that's good stuff. I guess just one last question for you. Like now that you're on the other side and you've
Mm.
gone through the process, like in hindsight, what's one piece of advice that you have for people who are maybe still going through recruiting now, or maybe about to go through recruiting? Like, is there anything that maybe someone shared with you at some point along the way that just really moved the needle for you, or just like made a big difference, or maybe it was like an aha moment? And like, do you have anything like that that you want to share with kind of
Yeah.
our?
I would say like I guess as far as like my biggest piece of advice, I think like maybe recruiting for 24 starts in like a couple months. Is networking super early and understanding like even if you're not like 100% committed to investment banking, like it's one of the best places to start your career. And unfortunately, like the recruiting starts so early, you have to get on it. So if this is like your number one priority, because like breaking into banking completely changes the trajectory of your career and your life, like it should be a priority of yours if that's what you want to do. Networking early and obviously like looking into like Wall Street Mastermind. Like a regret I had, I guess, is joining super late. But like I said, I'm very fortunate the way it turned out for me. But like Wall Street Mastermind is like the hub of like everything you'd ever need to break in and get the job.
Hmm.
And honestly, like that, like I said, made me very confident because all the resources are there. It's very overwhelming at first, like thinking about all the different details of breaking into banking, but the way it's laid out with this program is super structured. You go through like your networking and then obviously behavioral, technical modules, and you have to complete them before you move on to the next. So yeah, I guess that would be my piece of advice. And what was the other part of your question? Like a
No, that
money.
was it. It was just like, do you have like a piece of advice that you want to share with people? Which, I think what you shared was really, really good. And I really agree with your point about um like even if you're not sure that
Mm.
banking is what you want to do, like I'm not saying like banking has to be like your life's calling or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people actually do banking, and they only intend to do it for like 2 years. It's like
Yeah.
we're being completely honest, the vast majority of the people that go into banking do it for just 2 years as an analyst, and then they move on to like bigger and better things. Or you can stay if you love it, but like, even if you don't, like you just get that training, get that learning experience, get that halo effect on your resume that you get
Yeah.
to benefit from the rest of your career. And like all the other employers, once they know that you've done investment banking, it's like you become just a much more attractive candidate to them,
Yeah.
someone that we want to have on our team because we know you're sharp, we know you're smart, we know you're analytical, and we know you're a workhorse, right? Like we know like working in banking and then working for us is gonna be a walk in the park, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like you get to reap the benefits for like the rest of your career. And that's like even if you're not quite sure what you want to do, yeah, I always talk about like investment banking. I feel like it's almost kind of like a good way to kick the can down the road a little bit. It's like so you don't have to make a decision on what you want to do for the rest of your career when you're just like 21 years old,
Mhm.
because a lot of you don't know, right? But like it's one of the few jobs where you can do it for 2 years, and not only does it not pigeonhole you down
Yeah.
a specific path, it actually opens up a lot more doors and gives you more options than you had 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. I couldn't agree more with what you said.
That's what like one of the benefits that people don't think about. I feel like people understand like the high pay, the compensation,
Mhm.
150 $200,000 plus right out of college. People understand like it's prestigious, whatever. But the other thing is like optionality,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
and that's huge for someone who's like maybe still young and don't quite know what they want to do, right? And so, and for you to like buy yourself more time, get paid a lot of money doing it, learn a bunch, make a bunch of really good connections for your network, is just like
Mhm.
the only downside is maybe like the work-life balance, right? And so you have to like make that trade-off and make a little bit of sacrifices when you're still young and you don't have a lot of other obligations yet. You don't have a family, you don't have kids. Like if you're ever gonna work hard, now's the time to do it,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
Awesome, man. So I think that's really great advice. Guys, if you're still with us and kind of everything we said makes sense to you, like, maybe you have some imposter syndrome or you have some maybe limiting beliefs about whether you can actually do this or not, because you've heard of like just how hard investment banking can be, and you want like a reality check on like, hey, is this something that I can actually realistically achieve? Or maybe you just want some advice on like, hey, maybe whatever you've been doing hasn't really been working,
Mhm.
and you want like a new and better way of doing things, of going about whether it's your interview prep, your technical prep, your behavioral prep, how to network, whatever it may be. I want to encourage you guys to reach out to us. You can actually, what you can do is you can schedule a call first with one of the alums that have actually gone through our program. So usually this is like an upperclassman who's already finished recruiting. We'll let you talk to someone like that first. Totally free call. It was a virtual coffee chat, and you can just ask them whatever you want about recruiting. You can ask for recruiting advice. You can ask about their experience in our program if you're curious about that. And then, like after you have that conversation, if and only if you still are interested in working with us, then they can help you get introduced to us and connect us, and we can set something up. And we can talk to you more to see if you're a good fit. Like I said, we can't help everybody, but like we want to make sure that every single person that comes in the program we can actually help. Like we can, like we can actually get them the results, right? But like if we determine that we feel good about our ability to help you, and again, like I said, that doesn't mean you have to go to an Ivy League school. That doesn't mean you have to have a 4.0 GPA. Like we've seen it all. We've helped all sorts of students get in, and so like we will give you our honest opinion on whether we can get you in or not. And if we can, be happy to help you. Even if we can't, at a minimum, we'll give you some advice on what we think you should do instead. And so either way, our goal is just for you to, have a great experience with us and walk away with some value no matter what, right? And so if that's something you're interested in doing, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply to book this free virtual coffee chat with one of our alums. Again, it's The streets abbreviated, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. All right. So with that said, Kourosh, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. I know you're in midterm season, you're super busy, and just got back from football practice, and so your schedule is packed. And so I do really appreciate you for being here. And then obviously, again, huge congrats on getting an amazing offer, super late in the process. You totally deserve it. And I'm excited to see what you accomplish. I think you'll do really, really well there. And just, don't be a stranger going forward. If there's anything else we can do for you, like, you're part of the family. So
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I enjoyed this conversation a lot. So no worries on that. Thank you.
awesome, man. Me too as well. So all right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up here. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back with more of these for you guys in the future. And until next time. All right.